Everybody in Cedar Ridge thought 17-year-old Noah Bennett had finally lost his mind. His family was already behind on 2 loan payments. Their old farm had not produced a real profit in almost 3 years. His mother was working double shifts at a nursing home, and the last thing they could afford was another risky idea. But on a cold Tuesday morning, Noah spent nearly every dollar they had left on 240 young macadamia trees that a nursery had marked for disposal. The trees were uneven, bent, and smaller than they should have been. Some had yellow leaves. Others looked like they had stopped growing completely. Then, before anyone could understand what he was doing, Noah brought 24 beehives onto the driest part of the property. His neighbor, Carl Dawson, stood beside the fence and stared at the rows of struggling trees and wooden hive boxes. "You know those trees can take years to make money, right?" Carl called. Noah kept tightening a strap around one of the hives. "And you know bees need flowers?" Carl added. "There's barely anything blooming out there." A few people laughed from the road. One man joked that Noah had found the slowest possible way to go broke. Another said the bees would leave before the first tree died. Noah heard every word. He just didn't answer. Because he wasn't looking at what the farm was that day. He was looking at what it could become. The Bennett farm sat at the edge of Cedar Ridge, a small agricultural town in Northern California, where dry summers seemed to last longer every year. The property had once belonged to Noah's grandfather, Henry Bennett. Henry grew peaches, walnuts, tomatoes, and almost anything else he could fit into the soil. He had broad hands, a quiet voice, and a habit of carrying sunflower seeds in his shirt pocket. When Noah was little, Henry would take him through the orchard before sunrise. He showed him where insects gathered, which leaves changed color first, and how a field could tell you what it needed if you slowed down long enough to notice. "Farming isn't about controlling everything," Henry used to say. "It's about helping the right things work together." After Henry died, Noah's father, David, tried to keep the farm going. But 2 years later, David was badly injured when a tractor rolled on a steep section of the property. He survived, but damage to his spine left him unable to do heavy work. Medical bills piled up. Equipment broke down. A long drought reduced their harvest. By the time Noah turned 17, most of the farm sat unused. His father spent his days in a wheelchair near the kitchen window, watching land he could no longer work. His mother, Rebecca, left home before sunrise and often returned after dark. Noah went to school, worked evenings at a feed store, and handled as much of the farm as he could. Still, the numbers kept getting worse. One night, Rebecca spread the bills across the kitchen table. "We may have to sell the south field," she said. Noah looked toward the dark window. The south field was the driest and least productive part of the property. Selling it made sense. But it was also where his grandfather had first taught him how to plant. "How long do we have?" Noah asked. "Maybe 2 months." The next day, while making a delivery for the feed store, Noah passed a nursery outside town. A handwritten sign near the gate read, "Clearance stock." Final week. Behind the greenhouse, workers were moving hundreds of young trees toward a large disposal pile. Noah stopped his truck and walked over. The trees were macadamias. He knew they were valuable, but he also knew they were slow-growing and sensitive when young. A nursery manager named Luis Ortega explained that the trees had been part of a failed wholesale order. Some were too small. Some had crooked trunks. Others had been stressed by poor watering. "No commercial grower wants them," Luis said. "They want trees that all look the same and grow at the same speed." Noah knelt beside one of the pots and pulled back the loose soil. The trunk was weak, but the roots were still pale and firm. "This one's alive," Noah said. Luis shrugged. "Alive doesn't always mean profitable." Noah checked another, then another. Most of the roots were healthy. "How much for all of them?" Luis laughed because he thought Noah was joking. Noah wasn't. Luis offered the entire group for less than the price of 20 normal nursery trees, mostly because disposal would cost him money. Noah did not buy them that day. He went home and spent the entire night reading old agricultural books, extension notes, and the journals his grandfather had left in the workshop. Macadamia trees needed time. That was the problem. The family needed money now, not years from now. But in one of Henry's notebooks, Noah found a sentence underlined twice. "Never build a farm around one harvest." The next page contained sketches of flowering plants, water lines, orchard rows, and small boxes marked bees. That was when Noah began to understand. The trees did not have to produce the first income. The land could do more than one job. The next morning, he visited a local beekeeper named Tom Alvarez. Tom was 63 and had been keeping bees for most of his life, but recent development had removed several fields where his colonies once gathered nectar. Without stable forage, feeding the bees had become expensive. Tom was planning to sell half of his hives. Noah told him about the macadamia trees, the abandoned south field, and his plan to plant flowering ground cover between the rows. Tom listened without interrupting. "You've never managed bees before," he said. "No." "You've never grown macadamias either." "No." "And your family needs money now." Noah nodded. Tom leaned back in his chair. "That is either a terrible plan or a very good one." "Which?" "I won't know for a few years." Noah smiled. "That makes two of us." He used his savings from the feed store to reserve the trees. Then he went home and told his parents. Rebecca stared at him across the kitchen table. "You spent how much?" "I haven't paid yet." "Noah, we're talking about selling land." "I know." "And you want to fill it with trees that might not produce for years?" "The trees aren't the whole plan." He explained the bees, the flowering plants, the honey, and the idea of building short-term income around a long-term crop. His father listened quietly from his wheelchair. "What happens if the trees die?" David asked. "I learn why. And if the bees leave, I find out what they need, and if none of it works?" Noah looked down at his grandfather's notebook. "Then at least we didn't lose the land without trying." Rebecca closed her eyes. She had spent years watching financial problems turn every family decision into an argument. She did not want to risk the last of their money. But she also knew that selling the field would only delay the larger problem. Finally, she said, "We keep enough money for one loan payment." Noah nodded. "And you finish school?" "I will." "And you don't hide bad news from us." "I won't." His father reached for a pen. "Then let's plant." The first truck arrived 3 days later. The trees looked even worse lined up beside the field. Their leaves were dusty. Their trunks were thin. Their shapes were uneven. People slowed their cars to look. Carl Dawson walked over and examined one of them. "You paid for these?" Noah kept unloading. "Not much." Carl pulled off a yellow leaf. "They should have paid you." The hives arrived the following week. That created even more talk. Some neighbors worried about being stung. Others said the colonies would swarm. A few predicted the bees would fly straight to better farms. For the first month, it seemed like they might be right. 12 trees wilted after transplanting. 6 more developed brown edges on their leaves. Ants invaded 2 of the hives. Then a hot, dry wind swept through the valley and stripped blossoms from nearly every flowering plant Noah had put between the rows. One evening, he found hundreds of dead bees near a hive entrance. He sat in the dirt until the sun disappeared behind the hills. His father rolled his wheelchair down the rough path and stopped beside him. "How bad?" David asked. Noah did not look up. "Bad." "Are the colonies gone?" "Not all of them." "The trees?" "Most are alive." David waited. Noah rubbed the dust from his hands. "Everybody said this would happen. Everybody says a lot of things. What if they were right?" His father looked across the field. When David had first been injured, doctors told him many things he would never do again. Some were true, some were not. "You don't need them to be wrong about everything," he said. "You just need to learn faster than the problems show up." The next morning, Noah called Tom. Together, they opened every hive. The dead bees had not been caused by starvation. A nearby property had sprayed chemicals during the afternoon when the bees were still active. Tom helped Noah move the affected hives farther from the boundary. They raised the hive stands to reduce ants. They placed shallow water stations with stones so the bees could drink without drowning. Noah replaced the dead ground cover with a mix of drought-tolerant plants that flowered at different times. He planted rosemary, clover, lavender, buckwheat, and native wildflowers. He spread mulch around the young trees to protect their roots. He repaired an old irrigation line and divided the field into smaller watering zones. Instead of giving every tree the same amount of water, he checked the soil and adjusted each section. It was slower. It was harder. But the field began to change. The first thing to return was sound. At sunrise, the area that had once been silent filled with the low movement of bees. Then color appeared. Purple lavender opened near the fence. White clover spread between the rows. Small yellow flowers covered the driest corners. The macadamia trees were still small, but new leaves began appearing at the ends of their branches. One afternoon, Rebecca walked into the field after work. She stopped beside a tree that had nearly died 2 months earlier. A bright green shoot had grown from the side of its trunk. "It made it," she said. Noah smiled. Most of them did. The bees produced their first small honey harvest before the end of summer. It was not enough to save the farm. Not even close. But when Tom opened the first frame, the honey had a light floral smell unlike the stronger blends sold in local stores. Noah filled 12 jars. He printed simple labels at school. Bennett Farm Early Bloom Honey. The first 6 jars sold at the feed store. The next 4 went to a roadside produce stand. His mother bought the final 2 because she said a business should never let its first product look unwanted. Noah laughed. For the first time in months, Rebecca did too. The next harvest produced 48 jars, then 90. People began asking why the honey tasted different. Noah explained that the bees gathered from several flowering plants spread across the orchard, not from one large crop. A local baker named Anna Reed bought 3 jars and used the honey in a batch of pastries for a weekend market. She returned the following Monday. "I need 20 more." Noah thought he had misheard. 20 jars? To start, Anna posted a short video from the farm. She filmed the uneven macadamia trees, the flowers between the rows, and Noah lifting a honey frame while thousands of bees moved around him. In the video, she said, "This kid is rebuilding his family's farm by giving bees a place to live while he waits for his trees to grow." By the end of the week, the video had more than 300,000 views. Orders came from people Noah had never met. Some wanted honey. Others wanted to visit. Several asked whether they could buy trees. A restaurant in San Francisco requested a standing monthly order. For the first time, the family used farm income to make a loan payment. Not Rebecca's nursing salary, not borrowed money. Farm income. David held the payment receipt for a long time. Then he handed it back to Noah. Your grandfather would have framed that. But success brought a new problem. The bees were producing more honey than Noah could bottle by himself. The orchard needed constant care. School still took up most of his day. One Saturday, he placed a sign near the road. Free orchard and beekeeping workshop. Beginners welcome. At 9 in the morning, no one came. At 9:15, a truck pulled into the field. Carl Dawson stepped out. Noah raised an eyebrow. Carl looked toward the hives. My wife wants a garden. Noah waited. She says we don't have enough pollinators. Noah kept waiting. Carl sighed. Are you going to make me say I was wrong? No. Good. But you were. Carl stared at him for a second. Then he laughed. By noon, 5 more people had arrived. The next week, there were 18. Noah taught them how to plant flowers in sequences, so something was blooming through most of the growing season. Tom showed them how to approach a hive calmly. Rebecca taught people how to clean jars and track orders. David began drawing orchard layouts from the kitchen table. Soon, the Bennett farm became less like a struggling property and more like a classroom. A laid-off mechanic named Marcus repaired the old honey extractor. A retired teacher organized tours for local children. A single mother named Grace started making beeswax candles in her garage. Carl planted 2 acres of flowering herbs and placed 4 hives near the back of his property. Other farmers began adding pollinator strips between their crops. The changes were small at first. Then they became hard to ignore. Gardens produced more fruit. Roadside stands carried local honey. Empty lots filled with wildflowers instead of weeds. The town formed a cooperative so small producers could share equipment, labels, and shipping costs. And all the while, the macadamia trees kept growing. They were no longer weak nursery rejects. Their trunks thickened. Their branches spread. Every spring, the orchard became louder. Then, in the 4th year, Noah found the first meaningful cluster of macadamia nuts. He stood under the tree with both hands wrapped around the branch. He had imagined that moment so many times that he expected to shout. Instead, he just stared. His father was the first person he called. David came down the path in his wheelchair. Rebecca followed behind him. Noah pointed to the cluster. For a moment, nobody spoke. 4 years earlier, that tree had been headed for disposal. Now it was producing the crop everyone said Noah was foolish to wait for. Rebecca touched one of the green husks. How many trees have nuts? Almost half. And next year? Probably more. David looked around at the flowers, the hives, and the rows of healthy trees. "We thought we were trying to save one field," he said. Noah shook his head. No, David said. "We were saving more than that." By the 6th year, the South Field had become the center of a much larger network. The family sold honey, roasted macadamia nuts, beeswax products, and young flowering plants. Visitors came for farm tours. Local students learned about pollinators. Farmers from nearby counties attended workshops on building more than one source of income from the same land. Noah never claimed that his system was perfect. Some trees still struggled. Some seasons were dry. Colonies became weak and had to be replaced. Prices changed. Equipment failed. But the farm no longer depended on one crop, one harvest, or one person. That was the real difference. The trees gave the bees shade, structure, and a long-term source of flowers. The flowers fed the bees while the orchard was still young. The bees produced honey and supported pollination across the farm. The honey brought in money while the family waited for the macadamias. And the macadamias gave the farm a valuable crop that could last for decades. Each part helped support the others. So did the people. Years earlier, the neighbors had laughed because they saw weak trees and boxes full of insects. They saw risk. They saw delay. They saw a family too desperate to recognize a bad idea. But Noah had seen something else. He saw roots that were still alive. He saw bees searching for a place to work. He saw dry land that was not useless, only unfinished. And he understood something his grandfather had tried to teach him long before the farm was in trouble. Very little in nature succeeds alone. A tree can survive by itself. A bee colony can survive somewhere else. A family can struggle quietly behind closed doors. But survival is not the same as growth. Growth begins when the right things are allowed to support one another. One evening, Noah stood at the edge of the orchard as the sun dropped behind Cedar Ridge. The macadamia trees cast long shadows across the ground. Bees moved through the last open flowers of the day. Near the packing shed, his father was showing 2 children how to crack a macadamia shell. His mother was laughing with customers. Carl was loading honey into the back of his truck. The field his family had almost sold was now the one place nobody could imagine losing. Noah walked to the first tree he had planted. Its trunk still curved slightly to the left. A commercial grower might have rejected it for being uneven. Noah placed his hand against the bark. The tree had never needed to look perfect. It only needed a real chance to grow. And maybe people are not so different. Sometimes the world looks at slow progress and calls it failure. Sometimes people see an unusual idea and laugh before they understand it. Sometimes the most valuable thing in your life begins in a form nobody else wants. That does not mean it has no future. It may simply need patience. It may need the right environment. It may need someone willing to see life where everyone else sees loss. Noah did not save his family's farm with one miracle harvest. He saved it by connecting small things that other people had overlooked. A rejected tree, a homeless colony of bees, a dry field, an old notebook, a family that was almost out of options. None of those things seemed powerful on their own. Together, they changed everything.